Jason VanRuler, welcome to the Coupley Relationship Advice Podcast.
Hey, Tim, I've been looking forward to this. This is exciting. I'm glad to talk with you today.
I'm looking forward to it as well. I really enjoyed reading your book, man. Wow, amazing job. That was an awesome read.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really fun to have it out. I still forget that I wrote a book. So when people say that, sometimes I act kind of surprised. And then I remember, oh, yeah, I wrote a book. Yeah, that book came out.
What's the gap between writing it and actually getting it published? Like, how long is that gap?
For me, it was about 18 months. So it was quite a while. Yeah. So it gives you a lot of time to refine the book, lots of good edits and all that sort of thing. But that's what traditional publishing, it can just take a little bit. So by the time you kind of get to the finish line, it's like, yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time. So I'm kind of ready to move on to the next thing.
And now everyone wants to talk to you about it. So
it's really great.
You have to start from the beginning again. For those listening to this who aren't aware, Jason wrote Get Past Your Past. It's been an awesome read. I really do recommend it. Everyone listening to this wants to work on, improve, and keep their relationship amazing. I think this is essential reading. And today, Jason and I are going to go through 10 stories, 10 powerful analogies that will transform your life, because this book is just filled with fantastic parables. And Jason and I are going to run through my favorite top 10, and then coupley audience, if you like these, get the book, because there's tons more that we don't go through. Jason, I'll give a quick introduction about you to the coupley audience as well, if that's cool. So Jason is a therapist, relationship thought leader, author, speaker, father, husband, and you might have seen his stuff on Instagram where he is jason.vanruler. I suggest, if you're listening to this, head to Instagram, give him a follow, jason.vanruler. He's got such amazing content that will help you improve your relationships. Jason, we start the book here with the rock bottom, and there's sort of two people in the relationship space that I speak to. There's people that hit rock bottom and those that have a peek at what rock bottom can be. And I'm going to read, if it's cool, a little bit of the book, because it's going to frame this up really well. I remember it like it was yesterday, the first time I realized I was completely broken. I'd just woken up from a terrible night of drinking and using drugs. Disheveled, sick, with an empty wallet. I was in an apartment I couldn't afford, hours from anywhere I'd known growing up, and had nothing but an unstable job and lots of debt. I looked in the mirror and didn't like the person who looked back. Loathed would not be too strong a word. I grew up with lots of trauma and woundedness, and I remembered being that little boy who promised himself he'd run away from anything even close to the abuse, addiction, chaos, and conflict he was witnessing and suffering. And yet, here I was, in many ways, acting out the same patterns I'd seen as a kid, often with the same results. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from this rock bottom, and how did this kickstart your journey?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough spot to be. And that question is the one that we ask ourselves in that space, is where do we go from here? Because we have realizations, and oftentimes they're realizations of things we've been avoiding for a long time. Those truths that I wrote about in the book, about where I was at that time, those have been true for a while. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. It wasn't like they had just popped up the day before. Those had been going on. And so I think for me, what it was is just kind of realizing that I had run away from the things, like I said, but I ran in a circle. And so I just came right back to where I started. And I hate that, because I really did want to run away. And it seemed for a moment like that's what I was doing. So for me, to kind of have that realization of, I ran in a circle, I'm back to where I didn't want to be, was actually, it was painful, but it was a little bit freeing, because I thought, okay, well, now I know that doing it my own way hasn't worked. And so I'm going to need some help if I'm going to do it differently. And so really, I'd love to say that everything changed that day. And, the next day I was like a different person. But I've always been kind of a slow learner. So I didn't learn right away. But a seed was planted that it could be different. And I had an inclination of what I would need to do to get there.
So many of us seem to unwittingly create the patterns that we grew up with. Why is that? Why do we
It's
do that, even if it's unconscious?
Yeah, it's what we're trained to do, whether we like it or not. Those experiences, those relationships are very impactful because they literally teach us about what it's like to be in a relationship. I know you talk to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people, but so many people I talk to say, I just never knew any other way because it's what I grew up with. Right. And for so many of us, like, we don't really know if how we grow up is normal or weird or strange until we have something to compare it to. And so then when we have something to compare it to, we start to take a look back and say, like, oh, what was that like? But the truth is that impacts us because we've already been trained that that's how we love other people. That's how we do things. And so it's hard to unlearn that. It takes active and intentional work.
This work starts with identifying feelings, and this moves us onto our second parable here. Stifling feelings is like stifling a cough in a packed church in peak COVID. Talk to us more about that.
Well, that was the worst, right? Or if you go to the shopping mall or the grocery store and you've got a cough and you know how you do that thing and your eyes are watering and you're feeling that and it just has to come out, but you hold it back. Well, so many of us do that with how we feel. We just get better and better at it, but we become so tight and so tensed up trying to hold that back that our whole existence becomes about holding it back, not letting it out. And
Wow.
so if we want to get better, if we want to change things, we actually have to let it out. And it feels scary. I mean, I use that example because literally it can feel that scary to let those feelings out, to say, like, I'm actually sad about this, or I'm actually really angry about that. Like, that can feel equally as uncomfortable as that situation, but it's necessary if we want to change.
It's terrifying when you think about having these hard conversations with people that you love. And it's often people that you actually love. If you don't care about someone, it's much easier to have a hard conversation, tell them to get lost. But when it's someone that you really care about and someone that you want to be in your life for the rest of your life, all of a sudden the pressure on letting that letting that out and trying to do it justice, trying to do it in the right way feels really hard because I feel like so many of us, we have a feeling and then we try and explain it and then it goes so wrong when we try and let it out.
Yeah, because we're really interested in the outcome. So where we get into trouble is we say, I want to share this feeling provided I get this outcome. And what's
Mm,
problematic about that is we can't control other people. And so we don't know what they're going to do. I mean, we can guess. I mean, some things are easier to guess than others, but we really can't exactly predict what's going to happen. And so what we end up telling ourselves is, I only want to share this stuff if I get the outcome I want. And that's highly problematic because what's more important is sharing the feelings and getting them out than it is to manage the outcome, because you really can't. It's just not possible.
and that's terrifying. And that's terrifying because then you end up sharing something and then it goes wrong and then you feel like you're in a worse, you feel like that you're in a worse state if you'd have just kept it in. But the truth is that keeping it in long term is going to put you in that worse state, and you get yourself in this self perpetuating cycle in which you're spending so much energy managing your own feelings that nothing's going to go forward, and that then becomes the problem.
Well, and then at a certain point, we don't even know what we feel anymore. Because
Oh
we
God.
get so used to holding that back that now we're a little bit confused as to if we really feel that or not, or what that's even about, because we don't feel anything. So I talk to so many people who say, like, Jason, I just haven't leaned into how I feel about things for so long. I'm not even sure where to start. And if I really sort this out, I'm not even sure what to think about that. And so we get to this place where, in the absence of that, we just become very numb and it becomes difficult to even grasp onto what we need to be feeling in the moment.
Do you think that impacts men more than women?
Yeah, I think so, because I think for men, feelings are really complicated. I mean, I think we're just not always wired in a way that makes that easy for us. But then culturally and societally, we're not necessarily taught that that's something we should do. I'm over here banging the therapist drum and talking about feelings, which of course is no surprise to anyone. But if you can believe, most men are not encouraged to do that growing up. That's I don't know about you and your experiences, Tim, but for me, that was not happening on my soccer team or when I was in school. Like that, that wasn't a thing. You were allowed to be angry. That
Yeah.
emotion was okay, but that was about the only one.
Yeah, yeah, you're allowed to be angry and you're allowed to kind of go into this monk mode where you get really into one specific thing, like, oh, I'm all in on this. I'm all in on getting jacked. I'm all in on my business. These are things that are pretty acceptable um, for guys, and they'll recognize that, oh, you're feeling stuff, but that energy is just going into pursuits, which is what men love to do, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's our favorite feeling is pursuit, right? I mean, it's acceptable. You know, people look at that. We earn respect that way, and so we just pour into the thing
And
instead of
unhealthy
doing.
pursuits as well.
Yeah,
Unhealthy too.
yeah, oh yeah, we gotta have some unhealthy coping there. We don't want it to all be healthy. So we have these feelings. They fuel our behavior, and that behavior isn't always positive. But the easier way to go about it is just to get back to the source and just say, like, what are the feelings and what do I need to do about that? Really, a lot of
Mm.
times we're afraid of what the feelings might say or do for us, but the truth is we just have to talk about them, and that's it. You know, it's not some big amazing thing that has to happen. You'd be surprised. Sometimes just letting that cough out is just the first and only step we need.
Yeah, I definitely remember having this conversation with not a therapist but a success expert who was really just good at identifying people having blocks, like deep blocks. And I knew that I felt like there was something in there, and it was only when I verbalized it and pulled it out, it was so small. It was so small, but I just needed someone to help me find this thing that was inside. And since we had that conversation, um, yeah, she just reached out recently and was like, "Wow, I've noticed. I can see it just from afar how everything is changing for you," which was very interesting. One of the next analogies you have here is around the Antiques Roadshow, uh, and this is an excerpt from the book. So if you haven't seen the Antique Roadshow, guys, basically what it's about. Oh, it's actually amazing, and I know there's an American one. Are you watching the British one? Or are you watching the
I've
American one?
watched both. I've watched
Okay.
both.
Yeah, and the British one, to be fair, is far superior. Sorry, guys, but
You're not wrong. You're not wrong about that.
the TV show is all about people bringing in these old items, and they're curious to get them valued, and they want to see if it's a priceless artifact or a piece of junk. And occasionally, people learn that their item they've bought is rare or has some historical value and is worth an absolute ton of cash. This is from Jason's book. What I find fascinating about the show is how people present items to the appraiser when they don't think their stuff is worth much. So they bring what they found from the attic and it's in like an old box or a torn bag, and they talk about the item like it's seen better days. But then they learn that the thing they bought in is actually worth a lot of money, and everything changes. How does that relate to ourselves?
So many of us are showing up to our lives that way. We're just kind of showing up, and we're actually allowing so many other people to be appraisers in our life, and we're saying, "Let me know if it's worth anything. Let me know." And if we get told, yeah, it's worth something, our whole demeanor changes, right? Then we're confident, and then we carry ourselves. Or if we're told, no, it's not worth anything, then we go, okay, yeah, that's what I thought too. And so if we're not careful, we end up doing this our whole life and with all the wrong people. And so the challenge is to find people who are going to help you see it accurately and are actually appraisers in something that is related to you. But the other thing is for you to find value, because how you present that matters a lot too.
And how you treat yourself when you have prescribed value to yourself dramatically changes all things: the food you put into your body, the way that you carry yourself, your posture, if you choose to work out or not, if you choose to do sports or not. I had this strange experience, Jason, where I always considered myself a non-athletic person, and I got the 23andMe results back, and they said, "Tim, you're in like the top 2% of fast twitch muscles, so you should your DNA is perfect for being an athlete." And it was absolutely shocking. I was like, I could not be less of a. And then I thought back, and I thought, well, wait a second. when did cross country at school, I'd always come in second or third or fourth, despite never training, and I'd always beat kids that played soccer and stuff. So maybe, maybe this whole time I was actually an athletic person, but it just took 23andMe to tell me that
You
in
needed
fact,
them to give you permission, right? And then it's like, well, okay. And so what you're demonstrating is like exactly the point. Is what we tell ourselves sometimes is inaccurate, it's unhelpful, and it's somebody else's message. And so relationally speaking, how often do we walk into dating or walk into a relationship and just say, I think this about myself, and so I need you to either confirm or deny that.
and people pick it up too, and it comes through. It comes through in the subconscious, in the way you talk about yourself, the way you present your boundaries. Sammy Wonder, who's a top ladies dating coach, she teaches ladies how to present their boundaries in a way that are flirty, sexy, fun, and firm. And so she'll give these ladies these tools where they say like, "Hey, I'm having so much fun when we connect, but I'm finding that your texting is a bit too inconsistent for the manner that I like. So if you can't stay in regular contact with me, that's fine, but I'm not the girl for you. Best of luck." And just putting a firm boundary, which I'm sure you feel like this and I feel like this, but when a girl says that to me, you're like, "Oh, wow, great. Like, this is interesting to me."
That doesn't push me away. That invites me in,
No.
right? It's like
Yeah.
I love this. I want more of that, because if you value you, then I do too. And so I'll show up and I'll do the thing. And I mean, we could go a long ways on this, but even like, when you look at how luxury items are branded versus regular items, and sometimes they're the same
Wow, yeah.
quality, but how that experience is presented and how they're shown to us tells us everything about how we feel about it. And so what I try to help people do and try to give them permission to do is say, like, I think you're the luxury item, and that's totally okay to act like it, because if you don't, they won't either. And so
Who,
it is okay to do that.
and who are the wrong people that prescribe us values, that
Yeah,
our value?
I think the wrong people are really people at all. To be honest with you, I mean, I think if we only know we have value because someone else says it, that's our first problem. So our first issue is, do we believe that? Because if we don't believe we have value, it's going to be a tough sell for anybody else. Anyone who's ever been in sales, I did sales for a long time. The worst sales jobs I had were always the ones where I had to sell something I didn't believe in, because I was terrible at it. I was like, I don't think you actually need this. I don't think it really makes sense. I basically had talked them out of it before I even approached the sale. Well, it's the same thing for us, right? If we approach our job or relationships and we are certain we don't have value, we don't do a great job of convincing other people either. And so that's really our first place to start. And then the people we want to find are people who are in it and they just see us for who we are. They're not so interested in making us different. I kind of talk about it like, if you remember, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but there's those pictures where they had all the dots, and then if you stared at it long enough, you could see the picture inside. Remember
Hours of fun
these?
on Christmas Day. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing: you have to find somebody that sees through that to see you. You don't try to make the picture different. You don't do that. You just say, like, yep, the picture's there. Who I am is there. You can either see me or you can't. But I'm not going to try to get value from people who don't see me.
Got it. Great. People often think that if you work in the relationship space, if you're a therapist, or perhaps you own an app to help people improve their relationships, then
I
you're going
don't
to be
know anyone that
perfect.
has that. Sure. But yes, I've heard. Yes.
Then you're going to be perfect at relationships. And the sad truth is, it's not like soccer, where if you train and practice a lot, you're always really good. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just not there yet. You've got a great story of a marriage retreat, and I'd love for you to share that one for us.
Yeah, so I went to a marriage retreat with my wife, and it was actually hosted by two people who are just a really big deal in my life. They're also super successful people, but they're just really important to me. And so we're doing this marriage retreat, and it's kind of like half and half. Like, I'm kind of half working, half participating, and all about my image, right? How is this looking to other people? Because, like you just said, I'm a therapist, so I should have like all of this figured out and people should be totally impressed. Well, we go and we take a break. And over the break, I can't really even tell you. I'm sure it was super important at the time, but we get into this argument, my wife and I do, and it actually escalates to be like one of the more significant ones. Like we're just, if you've been in a relationship, you can relate. We're doing the greatest hits thing, where it's like, here's the things that are never ever resolved, but let's bring them out in this old bag and let's talk about them and let's not get anywhere. And so it kind of escalates and really crescendos with me like, hey, when we get home, like maybe we should like sleep in separate beds for a while or something. Just because I'm in this place of stuckness and I'm angry. And so we have that. And then it's like, well, I guess we ought to go back to the retreat now. You
Oh
know,
God.
everyone else is swimming, everyone else is having fun. And it's, I don't even know why I'm volunteering. Cause like we have a Murphy bed in the basement. I don't want to sleep in the basement, but I'm volunteering to sleep in another bed. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's go back and pretend now.
Oh God.
As we do. Let's go back and pretend. And so we're walking back to the retreat, running into one of these guys, and he's a guy that like actually cares, and he says, "How are you doing?" But like he really meant it. It wasn't that like I just want to hear fine. And so I had this decision to make of like, do I tell the truth or do I just kind of suck it up and look okay? And in that moment, I'd like to say I'm this amazing person, but like I was really tempted not to do this, but for whatever reason, I just told the truth. I was just like, hey, we just did this thing. It's really rocky. And it actually like opened up a whole world to me because he was like, okay, all right. And so I was sure I was going to be rejected when I told him I was a normal person. And instead, they're just like, okay, let's talk about it. And so what I learned from that is like, how often do we do that? Where it's going on, it's going rough. And then we just try to bottle it all up and say, make it look good and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 1,000% guilty of that as well. And I think even probably just pretending both to myself and my partner that everything's okay. That is my go-to. Love a bit of pretending that everything's fine, even if there are probably things that we need to address or things that I'm unhappy about. I'm thinking like, oh, with time, I'll get over this. Much like the cough in the packed supermarket or the plane, turns out that the more you shove that down, the less you're actually getting over it. And maybe this is when it sort of erupts in these moments, in these arguments, because at that point you start pulling out all the drawers of your mind and thinking like, actually, I'm going to throw this in. I'm going to
It's
throw this
great.
in.
I love to throw things in there, just to keep it interesting. You thought we were arguing about this, but it turns out we're arguing about that. And you do that lovely thing where you get to the end and you have to remember, what are we fighting about again? I know I'm really angry. I'm sure about how I feel. I just have lost what it is that we're actually fighting about.
Yeah. And what I'm noticing as well, that I am beginning to recreate the fights and the way that my parents fought. I'm like, oh, I am actually starting to recreate this, which is absolutely insane to have that feeling and do it and realize it and then still do it anyway. Um, so strange.
It
So
is, and
strange.
yet it makes perfect sense because it's what you saw, right? So it's what you learned, it's what you saw. It just might not be what you want. And
Yeah.
so that realization that you're having, and I've had that one about myself, is actually like a great first step because it's insight. I mean, that's really what that is that's insight and awareness. And so when you have that, use that to fuel change. Like take
Yeah.
that and then say, okay, well, what do I need to do differently? Apparently, I've mastered doing what I've always done. So what do I need to do differently?
Yeah. In your career, what's so cool is that you've worked with felons to the super rich, but a lot of the problems don't seem to be too different. You have this great excerpt. I learnt this truth while working with felons, some of who committed heinous, unspeakable crimes. Some of their behavior was hard even to hear about. But what I found out after working with these individuals' victims was that rather than wanting this person dead, the victims wanted the individuals who had hurt them to grow and make better choices that lead to a healthier life. When asked if the person who committed the offense should feel forever ashamed or guilty, the victims who had gone through some counseling usually wanted the person to forget about them, address the problem, and make sure they never hurt anyone again. how does this relate to relationships? And can you talk more about this forgiveness arc?
Yeah, no one likes the F word, right? So no one's a big fan of the F word when it comes to themselves. And my clients always laugh because I'm like, "Have you forgiven yourself yet?" And they're like, come on now." I think when we hurt someone or we mess up in a significant way, what we would believe is that that person wants us to suffer. And I get why they would think that. In fact, I used to think that a lot too. But in talking with all these people, and they were maybe just better people than I am, but they were like, I don't, in fact, want that. Like, I want them to be healthy because, and someone had just said it so well, they just said, like, if they don't get healthy, then there was like no upside to any of this. You know, we kind of started our conversation today, Tim, talking about rock bottom. And if you decide just to camp out at rock bottom, that actually doesn't help anyone.
Hmm.
That's no benefit to anyone. So what happens is sometimes we hurt people and that's our rock bottom. And then we have a choice to make, which is to, again, make it about us and to live there or to improve. And if we choose to improve, that is really the only way to save that story. It doesn't change what's happened. It doesn't change how we hurt people, but it does change the story because that was our rock bottom on the way to something better. And I think it's kind of a counterintuitive idea because, again, I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. And so I've never really felt like, oh, I should forgive myself. And yet, if we don't, we're pretty much guaranteeing we're not changing.
Mm-hmm. And the you have this thing around how your own behavior also hurts you. So we've got the 5 ways that your own behavior hurts us. 1, you violate your own principles. 2, you traumatize yourself while you're violating your own principles. 3, you negatively affect or ruin a relationship. 4, you're wasted valuable time. 5, you've lost an opportunity that isn't coming back. So there are things that impact yourself when you do things that you're not proud of and act in ways that you wish you hadn't. But if you don't forgive yourself, this will end up just perpetually making yourself feel terrible forever.
Yeah. And no one wants that. We don't want that. And the people who love us don't. And they're not honored by that. So it seems, you know, and if you've been hurt by someone, you know, this message is sometimes a little hard to hear because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, Jason wants to talk about how
Yeah.
people got hurt when they hurt me. And that's not always a popular message, and yet it's also true. And so what I've learned time and time again about people who have hit bottom and they want to make significant change is it starts with them. Because if they can't do it, they can't ask for it.
I have a friend that was really not proud of the way his previous relationship ended. Fast forward a year, he's in a new relationship, but because he's so ashamed of how his previous relationship ended, he hasn't gone public with his new relationship. That is then causing problems with his new relationship because she feels like he's hiding her, and then he now needs to he wants to speak to his ex in person to try and like explain what's happening and why this is different. And a whole load of his behavior is just being driven by guilt because he hasn't forgiven himself yet, and it's really negatively impact his new relationship. His 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 ex isn't happy with him anyway, and he's just put himself in this horrible corner of everywhere he moves is like a loss, all because he did not forgive himself.
Yeah, and I love the way you explain that because I mean it is, you know, that corner we put ourselves in, right? We kind of like build a jail and then we walk in and we don't realize we're holding the key. And we say, well, this is where I have to be. And it's like, well, or you could, you know, use the key to open the door and walk out. But
Yeah.
we do that and we somehow feel like that's honoring someone else. And what it really is just avoiding what we actually need to do.
Love is like a bicycle or a Ferrari. I'd love for you to tell us the Ferrari story here.
Yeah, so I had this friend, and he gets a Ferrari. So for a long time, I have a number of friends that we've talked about whatever supercars we're going to buy, because I don't know, we're childish men, or I don't know what the thing is, but it seemed like the thing to do. is to say like, yeah, when we, grow up and we're successful, we're going to do this thing. And some of them actually have pulled it off. And so I have this friend and he gets his Ferrari and he's like, hey, I want to take you for a drive. And, it's a Ferrari. That's awesome. And so I go to get in and, the funniest thing is like, it is really uncomfortable. Now, if anyone at Ferrari is listening, I'm not in any way putting you down. You can still send me one. Love your products. But I'm just telling you, this particular Ferrari, super uncomfortable. And so he tells me all these kind of quirks, if you will, about how you need to ride in this vehicle and how you need to make it work. And, well, of course, you can't move your arm because the door, folds this way. And it just is like all these things. And it's so complicated. And the truth is like he spent a lot of time working towards something that was super complicated and didn't fit him. Right. And so the thing is like sometimes we do that with love. We get into this place with love where we say, I need to overcomplicate it. I need it to look this way. I have these expectations. And then we get it and it doesn't even fit us. And so then we kind of walk around in this relationship and we say, well, yeah, this is what we do. And this is how it has to look. And this is what we say. And it's like, but that's not even you. And so part of it is like, we have to just understand like simplicity and love is actually real love. Anytime that I meet with a client and they say, well, I'm in a relationship and I'm in love, but it's really, really complicated. You should take notes. I go, okay, all right. Yeah. So this is probably really unhealthy. This is probably not a healthy relationship. And if you need to justify it to me, I'm sure you need to justify it to you. And so what does that do for you to have that kind of relationship? In the same way that I asked the friend, what does it do for you to own the Ferrari? Well, it looks good. No one's arguing that. It looks good, but doesn't actually fit. Doesn't actually work.
Looks great from the outside.
Yeah.
A big vision. It's a big success signal from the outside. But when you're in it, you're worried about, you put in the book, I'm worried about going over potholes. I need to park it in certain places. I can't park it under these trees. Otherwise that might drop down and do the roof. I need to have a place to park it inside because in case there's a hailstorm and it gets destroyed, there's a lot of additional worries that you have once you have a Ferrari. It's very true.
Yeah. Very and true. So if you're a person who loves that and that feels good to you because you're built that way, awesome. But if it's not, then don't pursue that and don't make something simple into that.
My dad had very similar goal, bought a luxury Jaguar sports car, convertible one, F-Type, sick car. But, oh my gosh, the drama surrounding that vehicle is just madness. We needed to be stored inside for a British winter, which, as anyone listening to this knows, our winters aren't really anything. Jason and I have done time in the middle of... I've done time in the middle of Canada. Jason's done time...
We know winter.
We know real winter. So to store it in the garage, the roof needed to be fixed. And then the garage needed to be emptied. And then we had to buy another shed to put the things that were in the garage because the car's a little bit longer. And the amount of admin that this vehicle has done. And then because you have to put it in the garage under a cover to drive it, you have to do all these things. And at the end, we have like a 2001 Golf. And that is the vehicle that gets used the most.
Because it works.
It works. And you can do anything with it. And it's a tank. And you could drive it through a wall and it would still happen. Love is... horses, bears, and plants. And there's a very good dog to bear story in this that I'll let you tell.
Yes. And I love this story. I just love interesting stories, but there was this family, they're in China, I believe, and they wanted a dog, like families do. Right. And so they're at their local market and someone is selling dogs, which is clearly not like an American thing that happens, but they're at this market, they're selling puppies. And so they're like, we ought to buy one. And so they buy it. And they're just like happy with it, right? And so they start to raise it, but over time it starts to eat a lot of food, and like a lot of food is in. I think they talk in there like it's eating like 5 to 10 pounds of food a day. Which, I mean, I'm not the quickest guy ever, but I'd like to think I'd catch on to the problem a little before 5 to 10 pounds of food. But hey, just saying, to each their own. But they start to have this kind of question about like, oh, I wonder what the deal is. I wonder why it's eating so much. Until finally, like this puppy is just huge. And so they're like, I don't really know what's going on here. And they bring it to a vet. And the vet says, well, it's actually this really rare, small type of bear that's been endangered. It's this Asiatic bear. And so turns out the whole time they think they're raising a dog, a puppy, they're actually raising a bear. And the reason is they just never were really curious enough to ask a whole lot of questions. They just sort of took it and they just sort of kept changing who they are and their behavior to make it work without ever really asking, hey, is this like a good thing, or is this healthy or safe, or does this make sense? Like they didn't ask that for a long time. And if you've ever been in an unhealthy relationship, how often is that the case? It starts small, right? Puppies are always cute. Who doesn't love a good puppy? But sometimes they're bears. And sometimes it takes us a long time to realize that. In fact, so long that people get hurt.
It's so true. It's like these small changes, and I think a lot as you speak about this. I think about the honeymoon period as well, right? When you're in a new relationship and you're doing so many things automatically those first few years, and then once those hormones calm down, all of a sudden the things that you used to do naturally, the little compromises that you didn't do, the cute way they snored at night, isn't so cute anymore. This is when the real work begins, but you have to kind of decide, am I happy? Is this a bear I want to live with? Or did I not want a bear? Was this whole thing just a big mistake? And it's getting real, not allowing yourself being pulled along this stream of excitement because you have a new pet. It's like, what is this? What is this going to mean long term? Start asking those questions and thinking like that.
That's so good and so accurate. And so what I love about the story is like they brought the bear to someone who knew what a bear was, right? And they said, give me the truth about this.
Yeah.
And so they had the truth. And so what they realized is like they couldn't make the bear not a bear. But how often do we do that in relationships? We go, okay, well, tell me the truth about what this is. And it's like, well, they're a bear. And I'm like, wow, oof, I don't want a bear. I want a puppy. So can you just change that? Nope, can't change that. And so sometimes we have to realize, like you're talking about, like there's kind of one of two things. Like it's either an acceptance play or it's a change play. And some things can be changed, right? The snoring, you can get a CPAP, or there's like 5 million products to help you stop snoring. You can do that. Like that's maybe a change thing. But some of these other things are going to be acceptance plays. And you have to understand if you're willing to actually do that. I go ahead.
No, sorry, Jason, please.
No, I talk to clients a lot about this when they come in, when couples come visit me, and they'll say, I want so-and-so to be better at communication. And I'll say like, awesome. That's great. Scale of 1 to 10. How good do you think they are at communication now? And they'll say 2. They're a 2. And so I want them to be better. And I'll go, okay, well, here's the deal. I'm a brilliant therapist. And so it's not unusual for me to double people's skill set. So they are now a 4. They're a 4. I could pull that off for you. I could double it, which I mean, statistically, like that's pretty awesome results.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Are you happy? And what do you think they say, Tim? What do you think they say?
I want 10. I want 10.
I want 10. Because we all do. But that's the part where we have to kind of say like, yeah, people will try to change and change is possible. It's hard, but like some of this stuff too, we have to accept. Like the bear might live inside, but like it'll always be a bear.
Yeah, and it's similar with the Ferrari too. You know, you might want someone that is a certain way. You might love this one feature about them. People often want someone that's in really good shape, right? They want someone that is carrying some muscles. They're jacked. They're shredded. Guess what that means as well? That means they're regimented. That means they wake up typically between 5 and 6 a.m. That means they don't eat a lot of foods that normal people eat. They definitely don't. Most of them don't drink. Most of them are very, very reactive when things impact their structure. They don't want to go away on last minute. They're not spontaneous. You look at the flip side of what you want, they might not be very good communicators, because if someone is more rigid thinking, they might lack a little bit more creativity and not have that theory of mind around the other person. all of these things come on the flip side on something that you think that you want. Very similar to the Ferrari. I love this. On the theme of change and what's possible, you talk about seeing these dramatic post-prison release changes versus being able to hold it together long term. I'd love to hear more about this story, what you've seen, and how it relates to relationships.
Yeah. So one of the most fascinating things that I would see when someone was coming out of prison is that they would start with zero. And even sometimes less than zero, right? I would meet them oftentimes that first week that they would come out, and I'd kind of say, like, let's do just a little assessment of, like, you know, where are you at? What do you have? What do you have for relationships? What do you have for a job? What do you have for finances? And it would just be zero. They'd be like, hey, Jason, I'm going to make this really easy for you. We actually don't need to have a long conversation. Zero. I've got nothing. And I would say, okay, all right. And I would just be shocked at how many of these people were so good at, they'd come back a month later and I'd ask all the same questions. And they'd be like, I've got a relationship, I've got a job, got a place to stay, got some income. Like, everything would have changed. And I'd be amazed. But here's the thing. Even though they could do that, not many of them could say the same thing 3 months later. They could do it in the first month, which is extraordinary. And a lot of people couldn't do that. But 3 months later, if I asked that same question, they'd either be back to zero again or working their way towards it. And the reason is they were starters, not sustainers. And so being a starter is a wonderful thing because there's a lot of glitz and glamour to being a starter. Like, it always is fun to be around a starter because they can just kind of make things happen. But what happens if we want a long-term relationship is we actually need people who can be sustainers. And sustainers are often a lot less sexy. Right. There's not like the wow factor. Like, I can't believe they did all this, because they're just like the people who just do the thing every day. And so what we have to learn how to do is to kind of work both angles, right? We need to know how to start, but we actually need to know how to sustain things and relationships. And that's a different skill set than starting. And really, I guess if I were to tell you the secret of it, what the secret is to being a sustainer is to have a community that supports it.
And talking about community, this dovetails perfectly into our next question. Sometimes having a good friend is cheaper. Sometimes having great friends is better than having a therapist. Talk more about this.
You may have said it right the first time. It is cheaper. It is cheaper. Don't tell therapists I said that. If anyone is listening, don't. It's bad for business. Here's the thing. We are built for relationships and community. We just are. And so if there's a thread of probably every person that I see, it's that they don't have a community that supports where they want to go.
Yeah.
That's just the thing. And so when you have that, your world looks different because people are pointed in the same direction, trying to help you get there too. And so what I would tell you is therapy is important. We talk about hard things that sometimes you can't talk about with other people, or not easily at least. But your community really is the kind of secret sauce that will keep you going or not. And it's cliche at this point because we think about, the 5 people you spend most of your time with and all these things. And yet I just like to point out it's absolutely true. And that's often where like cliche things come from. It is absolutely true. And so about the people coming out of prison who were trying to start over, if their community was all people who were in prison or working back to it, they are not going to get out of that lifestyle easily because they are actively fighting against the community. However, the people who were sustainers were people who actually had a community that supported them being different. And this isn't just for felons. This is for relationships. We don't have a lot of us relational people that we look up to. We don't have couples that we look up to. So we need all of that to point us in the right direction.
We could talk about this for an hour. I'd love to go deeper on this, Jason. We need to do another podcast in a few months and go even deeper.
I would love that.
But we're at number 9. We've got 4 minutes left.
We're going to
finish this. Number 10, real courage. Jumping from bridges versus taking leaps. Tell us the bridge jumping story, please.
Yeah, this poor person. We were on a bridge and we were doing as you would do. We were trying to impress girls, and this was middle school, high school-ish, and that's what you do. And so the bridge was high enough to be scary, but not enough to probably break every bone in your body. So as young boys do, we thought it would be great to jump off the bridge. And so I've always been a little risk averse. I've literally always been a therapist ever since I was a child. I've just acted like one, and so I'm calculating this. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm okay being in my corduroys and being single. So I'm just gonna stand on the bridge. But this other person, they decide that they're gonna like jump in the water, and so they jump into the water. And wow, they were so cool, and everyone just really loved them until we saw a snake in the water. And the snake was swimming directly at them. And so we start to scream, and the kid sees the snake and starts to scream and just does, what you do if you saw like a giant snake swimming towards you. Very embarrassing stuff, right? And makes it to the shore, and he's fine. But like, boy, that really that bombed. Like that was actually, there was like this impulsive thing to try to prove something to someone, and it was all about getting that external validation.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a snake, right? And then there's none of it. Like, we're all done. And so how often do we do that in life, where we do the thing, we have the courage for the wrong reason, and all of it is contingent on somebody else seeing us and thinking we're cool or we're great or we're wonderful.
Isn't that so true?
Yeah, we spend our whole life doing that. And it's all for somebody else. And when we do it that way, we are so at risk of snakes in the water. Not literally, figuratively, but we are so at risk of that happening because we're doing it for all the wrong reasons.
Jason, this has been incredible. How can people reach you and find out more about everything that you're up to?
Yeah. My website is jasonvr.com, so you can find out about me and the retreats that I offer there. And then, like you said, on Instagram, if you are listening today and you think, I love Jason's voice, I'd love to hear it every day of the week. Well, good news. You can for free on Instagram, where I post relationship advice nearly daily. So you can check that out too.
And also, Get Past Your Past, available on Amazon, all good bookstores. 1000% recommend it, and we'll put the links in the show notes below. Jason, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been so wonderful to speak to you today.
This was brilliant. I had such a good time. I appreciate you having me.